It was the kind of night that sticks to your skin even decades later. I'm an old man now, but I still wake up some mornings smelling wet earth and cordite, hearing boots in the dark. That night was in 1944, somewhere in Western Europe, and I was a US Army infantryman, 21 years old, carrying more gear than sense and trusting orders more than my gut. We were told it would be a quiet movement, no contact expected, just reposition before dawn. That's how it was sold to us. I remember tightening my helmet strap and thinking how tired I was of being tired. We'd been in the line for weeks, rotating through hedgerows and shattered villages, losing sleep a few minutes at a time. Nobody complained anymore. Complaining felt like tempting fate. The platoon was already stretched thin. Replacements barely knew our names. Some of them still flinched at outgoing artillery. I didn't blame them. Hell, I envied them a little. They hadn't learned yet what the dark could hide. What stayed with me wasn't fear at first. It was confusion. The kind that creeps in slow when things don't line up but you don't question it because you've been trained not to. Orders were orders. You followed them, even when they didn't feel right. Especially then. I remember our lieutenant whispering the route, pointing at a grease pencil mark on a folded map. His hands were steady, but his eyes kept lifting toward the tree line. No moon, cloud cover, thick as wool. The kind of night where distance lies to you. We stepped off just after midnight. Single file, no talking, rifles at the ready. Every man watching the back of the helmet in front of him, like it was the only solid thing left in the world. I told myself we'd be fine by morning. I told myself that because anything else felt dangerous. By the time the first shots cracked the dark, I already knew something had gone wrong. And before dawn came, half our platoon was gone. We were dug in on the edge of what used to be a farming village, what was left of it anyway. Stone walls blown open, barns collapsed inward like dead animals. The ground was churned mud mixed with straw, brick dust, and things I didn't like to look at too closely. It had rained earlier, not hard, just enough to make everything slick and quiet. Rain like that carries sound. We all knew it. Our platoon belonged to a rifle company pushing east with the division. I was a barman, which meant I carried the Browning and enough ammo to make my shoulders burn every time we moved. You learned fast not to complain about weight. Weight meant firepower. Firepower meant maybe seeing the next sunrise. Our platoon leader was a first lieutenant, fresh enough that his boots were still clean when we first got him. Smart guy, book smart. He listened to battalion, trusted the maps, trusted the chain. His platoon sergeant was different. A staff sergeant who'd been in North Africa and Sicily, face like old leather. He didn't say much, but when he did, men leaned in. The first rule I learned in combat wasn't about shooting, it was about listening. Not just for the enemy, but for what wasn't being said. Briefings were short that week, too short. Battalion was pushing hard, and nobody wanted to be the unit that slowed the line. We were told German resistance was broken in our sector. Scattered units, rear guards, nothing organized. Our routine before any movement was the same. Weapons check, ammo count, hand signals reviewed even though everyone already knew them. The smell of gun oil mixed with damp wool and sweat. Helmets pulled low, cigarettes crushed out and pocketed. No light, not even a match. You learned to do everything by feel. That night's order came down just before dusk. We were to move through a low stretch of woods, cross a sunken road, and set up a blocking position until first light. Simple on paper. The map showed friendly units on our flanks. Solid lines, clean symbols. Maps always looked clean. The sergeant asked one question during the briefing, just one. Any confirmation on those flanks? The lieutenant said, intelligence had it covered. That was the moment. Small, almost nothing, when the air changed. Nobody said a word, but we all felt it. The woods ahead looked darker than they should have. Sound carried funny. And somewhere deep down, the part of me that training never touched started whispering that the night didn't care what the map said. Still, when the order came to get ready, we got ready. That's what soldiers do. Our first real missions in that sector had been cautious ones. Daylight patrols along hedgerows, short advances covered by artillery, probing for weak spots. Nothing like the training back home, where targets popped up and instructors yelled. Here the enemy stayed quiet, and that was worse. Silence let your imagination run ahead of you. By the time that night came, most of us had already been under fire. Not heavy, not constant, but enough. Enough to know the sound of incoming rounds snapping overhead. Enough to know how fast a man could go from standing to gone. The replacements were still learning that part. They watched us older hands for cues, copying how we moved, how we paused before crossing open ground. We carried what we always did on a night move. Rifles loaded but on safe. Bayonets fixed more for confidence than use. Extra bandoliers slung tight so they wouldn't clink. My bar felt heavier than usual. The sling biting into my shoulder. I could hear my own breathing inside my helmet, slow and controlled, the way they drilled into us. Hierarchy mattered more in the dark. Squad leaders whispered commands, passed back by touch. A squeeze on the arm meant stop. 2 taps, meant down. Nobody spoke unless it was absolutely necessary. Radio stayed with Platoon HQ, volume low enough you had to lean in to hear the hiss. About 20 minutes in, I realized how different this felt from our earlier movements. There was no prep fire, no artillery walking ahead of us, no aircraft overhead, just boots, mud, and the soft scrape of gear. We were exposed in a way that made my stomach tighten. We reached the edge of the woods slower than planned. The ground dipped there and the trees grew close together, branches tangled like wire. Movement slowed to a crawl. That's when the first small things started stacking up. A compass check that took too long. A whispered argument about direction. The lieutenant stopping to recheck the map by feel, afraid to use even a covered light. I caught the sergeant's eye once. He didn't like it. I could tell by the way his jaw set. He leaned close and muttered almost to himself, "This don't line up." Training tells you to trust your officers. Combat teaches you to watch your NCOs. When those two don't match, you feel it in your bones. We pushed on anyway. Orders hadn't changed. Somewhere ahead was that sunken road. Somewhere to our left and right were supposed to be friendly units doing the same thing we were. I kept telling myself that, telling myself we weren't alone out there. But the night stayed empty, too empty. No movement, no distant gunfire. Just the sound of our own advance, each step carrying the weight of a decision we couldn't take back. That was when I understood something basic and terrifying. Whatever we were walking into, we were doing it blind. The first sign that the night was lying to us came from the right flank. Not gunfire. Worse, nothing. The expected sounds just weren't there. No rustle from another unit moving parallel. No whispered challenges. No accidental noise. We should have picked up something by then. Instead, it felt like we were the only men left in that stretch of country. We halted near what the map said was the sunken road. Nia was doing a lot of work there. The ground dipped, sure, but it didn't look right. Too shallow, too narrow. The lieutenant crouched with the platoon sergeant, both of them studying the darkness like it might explain itself if stared at long enough. That's when the sergeant finally spoke up. Low, careful. "Sir, this ain't it." The lieutenant bristled just enough for me to notice. He whispered back about grid references, about timing, about how battalion needed us in position before first light. The words were calm, but there was pressure underneath them. Schedules mattered more than instincts at that level. What made it worse was the radio, or rather the lack of it. Platoon HQ tried to raise company, just static. Tried again, same thing. No acknowledgement from either flank unit either. The radio operator adjusted the antenna, whispered that terrain might be blocking it. That happened sometimes, we all knew that. Still, it sat wrong. An old corporal in my squad leaned close and murmured, "In the war, what they don't tell, you'll kill you quicker than what they do." He didn't look at me when he said it. He kept his eyes forward, finger resting along the trigger guard. Orders came down to push a little farther, just enough to confirm the road. No one liked it, but no one argued. You don't argue in a whisper with darkness pressing in from all sides. We moved again, slower now, nerves stretched tight. That's when we found the first sign of someone else being there. A footprint in the mud that didn't match our boots. Then another, too crisp to be old. My heart rate picked up and I wasn't alone. Men started glancing left and right, rifles tracking shadows that refused to stay still. The lieutenant called another halt. His voice was tighter this time. He asked the sergeant what he thought. The sergeant didn't answer right away. He listened, head tilted, eyes closed for a second. "I think we're past where we're supposed to be," he said, "and I don't think we're on friendly ground." No one said the word ambush, but it hung there between us, heavy and unspoken. We waited for new orders. They didn't come. The radio stayed dead. The night stayed quiet, too quiet. And in that silence, I realized we weren't just following orders anymore. We were following the wrong ones. The decision came down in pieces like everything else that night. No clear command, no sharp turnaround, just a quiet acknowledgement that we were committed now, whether it made sense or not. The lieutenant ordered the squads to spread a little wider, form a loose perimeter while Platoon HQ tried the radio again. That alone told me how deep we were in it. You don't set a perimeter unless you think you might have to hold. I was pulled closer to the lieutenant and the sergeant, close enough to hear them without straining. That was new. Normally I stayed with my squad. Being that close to command meant something had shifted. Either they needed the bar where it could cover more ground, or they expected contact and wanted firepower ready. The lieutenant finally got a response on the radio. Faint, broken, a voice I didn't recognize. Clipped and rushed. Not company, not battalion, just fragments. Kurt position compromised. Pull back if, then nothing. Static swallowed the rest. That message changed everything. The lieutenant didn't say it out loud, but his face gave it away. We weren't just misplaced. Something had gone wrong on a larger scale. Flanks collapsing, lines bending or breaking. The kind of thing maps don't show until it's too late. Orders came quick after that. We were to push forward to the road, confirm its location, then decide whether to dig in or fall back. It sounded reasonable, but I could hear the uncertainty in it. Combat orders usually carry weight. These felt thin. As we moved, I noticed details I hadn't before. The woods weren't just dark. They were worked. Trampled brush, broken branches at shoulder height. Signs of recent movement, organized movement. I tightened my grip on the bar, thumb brushing the safety, and tried not to think about how many rounds I had left. We reached the road at last, or what passed for it. A deep cut in the earth, lined with roots and damp stone. It was defensible, too defensible. The kind of place you'd want to hold if you knew someone was coming. That's when the lieutenant realized it too. We weren't setting a block. We were walking into one. Before he could finish issuing new orders, a sharp crack tore through the night. Not close enough to hit us, but close enough to be deliberate. A ranging shot. Someone out there had eyes on us. The sergeant swore under his breath. Men dropped instinctively, pressing into the mud. I swung the bar toward the sound, heart hammering, waiting for the command to fire. It didn't come. Instead, the radio hissed once more. A single word cut through the static. Late. That was all. And then the night exploded. The first burst of machine gun fire came from the far side of the road, raking the tree line at waist height. It wasn't wild. It wasn't panicked. It was controlled, measured, walking its way through where a man would run if he still believed he could. That's how I knew for sure. We weren't facing a scattered rear guard. This was set, thought through, waiting. Contact front, someone yelled, the words tearing out of the darkness whether the lieutenant wanted noise or not. At that point, silence was already gone. The lieutenant finally shouted orders, not whispered anymore. Get down, return fire, bar up. That last part was for me. I dropped to a knee behind the lip of the road and opened up. Short bursts like they taught us. The recoil felt familiar, almost comforting. Dirt kicked up across the road as rounds hit. I saw muzzle flashes now, at least 2 positions, maybe more. Overlapping fields of fire. Somebody on the other side knew exactly what they were doing. Our squads tried to maneuver, but the moment anyone shifted, more fire came in, from the left, then the right. That was the confirmation we didn't want. The flanks weren't just gone, they were enemy-held. We'd walked straight into a pocket, and it closed the moment we showed ourselves. The radio operator screamed that company was calling now. Too late. Orders overlapped. Pull back, hold position, push through. None of it lined up. The lieutenant tried to regain control, voice cracking as he relayed what he could. The sergeant took over where he had to, grabbing men by their webbing, shoving them into cover, forcing order where there was none. I saw the first man go down about 10 yards to my left, took a round through the chest, didn't make a sound, just folded. Another caught shrapnel when a grenade went off behind us, fragments whining through branches like angry insects. Someone cried for a medic. The medic was already busy, too busy. We tried coordinating with what was left of second squad, hand signals barely visible in the chaos. Tracers cut red lines through the dark, showing us exactly how boxed in we were. Every direction we tested answered back with fire. That was the moment it settled in, heavy and final. This wasn't a bad patrol. This was a blown operation, and the price was being paid in real time, in blood and screaming and orders that came seconds too late to matter. Sometime in the middle of the firefight, the truth finally forced its way through the noise. Not all at once. It came in pieces, sharp and ugly. Between bursts, the sergeant crawled up beside me, his face smeared with mud and something darker. He leaned in close enough that I could smell the cordite on his breath. They knew we were coming, he said. No drama, just a fact. This was set before we ever stepped off. I kept firing, hands working on muscle memory alone, while his words sank in. The Germans weren't reacting to us. They were executing a plan. Pre-sighted lanes, interlocking fire. Grenades tossed not where we were, but where we'd be if we tried to move. That kind of precision didn't happen by accident. Then I heard it on the radio, not English. Clear German commands cut through the static, sharp and confident, like they owned the air. Our radio operator froze for half a second before ripping the headset off. Their frequency. Somehow, they had it. Or we were bleeding signals so badly it didn't matter. Either way, it meant the same thing. They were listening. The lieutenant finally understood. I saw it in his face when the sergeant shouted over the gunfire that battalion's last grid reference had been wrong. Not just off, a full kilometer short. Our friendly flanks were never there. They'd pulled back hours earlier after running into resistance we were never told about. Higher command knew the line was bent, maybe even broken, but nobody stopped our movement. Whether it was a delay, a miscommunication, or a decision made too far away to hear men die, I'll never know. What I do know is that we were sent forward to plug a gap that no longer existed. We weren't a blocking force. We were bait. That realization hit harder than the incoming fire, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Every order that followed felt hollow. Every shouted command felt felt like it came from another lifetime. The lieutenant hesitated, just long enough. The sergeant didn't. He made the call that officers aren't supposed to make. "We're breaking out, south. Smoke first, then move." Smoke grenades popped, white clouds blooming in the road cut. It bought us seconds. Seconds paid for in bodies. I laid down everything I had. Barrel glowing, the bar bucking against my shoulder as men ran through the smoke, some making it, some not. One of the replacements tripped near me, tangled in his own gear. I grabbed his pack and dragged him until my arms screamed. He was crying, not wounded, just shattered. I shoved him forward anyway. There was no time for gentle. That was my moral line. Leave him or move him. Freeze or act. I acted. Behind us, the road filled with fire. Ahead of us, maybe, just maybe, there was a way out. The breakout wasn't clean. It never is, no matter how they draw it up later. Smoke covered some of our movement, but it also blinded us. Men ran into each other, lost direction, vanished into the dark. German fire followed the sound, chewing through the haze like it knew exactly where we'd go next. I remember sprinting until my lungs felt like they were tearing loose, then dropping hard behind a low rise, dragging the bar with me. I turned and fired again. Not aiming at shapes anymore, just at flashes and sound. The lieutenant went down somewhere behind us. I didn't see how. 1 second he was shouting, trying to pull the platoon back together. The next, he was gone. Just another voice cut off mid-order. The sergeant took a round in the leg but kept moving, limping, swearing, refusing to stop. He was still giving commands when we finally broke contact, what was left of us stumbling into a shallow draw south of the woods. Dawn was starting to thin the darkness, just enough to show faces. Grey, hollow, shocked. We counted heads. That's when it hit hardest. Half the platoon didn't answer. Some were dead. We knew that much. Others were missing, which was worse. Missing meant questions you didn't want answers to. Capture. Bleeding out alone. Wrong side of the line with daylight coming fast. Company finally found us an hour later. Too late to help. Right on time to ask for reports. Intelligence officers showed up not long after. Clean uniforms, notebooks out. They asked about grid references, radio traffic, enemy strength. They listened, nodded, wrote things down. Then the questions narrowed. Who gave the order to push forward? What time did we step off? Did we receive confirmation from battalion? The sergeant was pulled aside. So was the radio operator. The rest of us were told to stay put, not to talk, not among ourselves, not to other units, until this is sorted out. It never really was. The official word was conflicting intelligence and unexpected enemy concentration. The lieutenant's death closed a lot of doors. The sergeant was reassigned within a week. We never saw him again. No explanation, just gone. As for us, we were folded back into the line like nothing had happened. New replacements filled the empty spaces. Same platoon number, same mission schedule, different faces. But from that night on, something was broken. Not just in the unit, in the way I heard orders. The war didn't end that night. It just moved on without the men we lost. The way wars always do. Weeks later, we were still pushing forward, still sleeping in holes and ruined houses, still jumping at sudden noise. The line shifted, towns fell, maps got redrawn. Officially, progress was being made. Inside, I was somewhere else. I stopped counting days after that operation, stopped thinking in terms of before and after. Everything blurred into a long stretch of mud, orders, and faces that changed too fast. The replacements who joined us after the ambush didn't know what had happened. They saw the empty looks in our eyes and learned not to ask. When the war finally ended and I went home, people expected relief, parades, smiles. They wanted stories that made sense, stories with clean endings. I didn't give them much. I couldn't explain how a single set of wrong orders could erase half a platoon before sunrise, or how that kind of loss didn't stay on the battlefield. I tried to settle into civilian life, got a job, got married, learned how to keep my voice steady. But nights were harder. In the dark, my mind went right back to that road cut, to the sound of German commands on our radio, to the moment I realized we were expendable in ways nobody ever says out loud. What stayed with me wasn't anger as much as doubt. Doubt in certainty, doubt in plans, doubt in the idea that someone somewhere always knows what they're doing. I learned that sometimes decisions are made too fast or too far away, and the cost is paid by kids with rifles in the dark. I never saw the sergeant again. I heard years later that he lived through the war, that he carried a limp the rest of his life. I hope that's true. I hope he found a way to sleep. As for me, I carried that night forward, into every quiet moment, into every hesitation before trusting a voice that claimed to know better. The war ended on paper in 1945. For some of us, it never really stopped. I'm telling this now because time has a way of sanding down the truth. It turns sharp nights into footnotes and dead led men into numbers. People talk about the war like it was a machine that ran the way it was supposed to, grinding forward until it reached the end. That's not how it felt from where I stood. From where I stood, the war was a series of choices made under pressure, with incomplete information and no chance to undo them. Most of those choices were made by decent people doing their best. Some weren't. And sometimes the difference didn't matter to the men who paid for it. That night, we followed orders because that's what soldiers are built to do. We trusted that someone higher up had a clearer picture, that the risks were understood, that the losses would mean something. Maybe they did on a map or in a report. On the ground, it just meant watching friends disappear into smoke and darkness, knowing there was nothing heroic about it. I don't think about medals or victories when I remember that night. I think about faces, about a kid tripping in the mud, and me dragging him forward because stopping meant dying, about a sergeant who broke the rules to save whoever he could, about a lieutenant who hesitated once just long enough for the war to take him. If there's a lesson in it, it isn't about bravery, it's about weight, the weight of decisions, the weight of silence afterward, the weight carried by the ones who walk away when others don't. People ask what the war taught me. I usually say it taught me how fragile plans are and how permanent consequences can be. That before dawn, in a place that doesn't even have a name anymore, half my platoon was erased by a mistake that never made it into a history book. And that's the part that stays with you, not the fighting, the knowing.